Hi guys, in this video I'm going to talk about how to fetch data from web service as JSON and save it to the core data using Swift. I know this topic is there for quite a long time, but I try to explain my perspective and my way of doing it. Uh, okay, so we'll be using this particular web service for this project. What this web service gives is it gives a list of album data by Taylor Swift. It's not big data, it's like around 5 sets of data, that's it. So I have taken the small one for our project. Okay, so this will be the API that we are going to use, and I have already created the project. I'm going to walk you through the necessary classes and the way how I implemented the project. So as a start, what we need is a response model. So we have seen the album data. It has a title, artist, URL and thumbnail image. So I have created an album response model, which is a which conforms to the Codable protocol, and you have the properties defined here. I'm using the coding keys also, just to have the proper mapping of the data. So that's our response data model. So once we have the response data model, next step is we need to create the network layer. In this project I am using Alarmify to fetch the data from the API, and I have written a wrapper around the Alarmify, which is called the network data manager. I have created it as a shared instance as of now. I mean, it doesn't have any heavy calls here, so I just thought of using it as a singleton instance. Now this network data manager has only one method, which is to fetch the data, and it will remain as one because its only aim is to accept a request from whoever is requesting and giving it to the Alarmify and returning the request, returning the response or any error back to the caller, and it doesn't do any parsing or any processing with the data. It's considered to be like a generic data manager. Now from where we will be getting the information about the APIs to be used. So we have some helpers, two helpers here called API router and API constants. So if you go to API constants, which is nothing but which will define the base URL. So as of now we have only one API, that's why I just put the whole URL here. Ideally how it happens is you will have the base URL like this, and you define your paths in the API router like this. So for example, like if you go to API router, we can see we have the base URL here, and you have the fetch all is one particular case, and probably you would have something like var path, which will send the path and append it to the base URL. Like let's say for fetch all, the path is API music albums, though this path gets appended to the URL request over somewhere over here. So right now I'm keeping it simple, so I'm just providing the whole path as the base URL. And in the HTTP method, for fetch all we want the get method only, and if you have more scenarios like posting some data or something, you can have another case here and return the post method. And after getting the base URL and the method, we will be converting it into a URL request. and URL request convertible is part of alarm of fire. So these two guys will provide us with the necessary information on where to get the data and which API needs to be called. So once you get the request, you will be passing into the alarm of fire, and once the response is obtained, you just pass it back to the caller as such. So now we are ready with the response model and the network data manager APIs, etc. Next step is to figure out what needs to be done with the database. So let's go to the CoreData data model and see what is being defined there. So you can see that I have an entity called album item here. To create an entity, you need to click the plus button over here, which will create a new entity, and to add attributes you can do either from here or from here. So right now you can see that you have the exact same properties here: artist, image, thumbnail, title and URL. All are like string types. So once you create an entity, you need to generate a subclass for it. To do, before you generate the subclass, you need to go to the data model inspector and then go to the code gen and choose manual /none, and then you go to the editor, create ns managed object subclass, click on it, select the data model and select the entity for which you need the subclass. So if you click next, it will create the subclasses for you. You can see that here it will be like 2 subclasses and with a fetch request, a default fetch request also present. Okay, now we have the core data class ready. We have generated the core data class successfully, and now like similar to what I have created for network, I'm going to create a core data stack which I call it as CoreData Manager. Let's go and see what is in there. So here also I have created the CoreData Manager as a shared instance or singleton instance. In this you have two methods: application document directory and application library directory. These methods are just for debug purpose, just to print out the directory where the DB is going to be saved. Let's say if you are using simulators, it will be tough to find out where the DB is getting saved, so you can just use this method to print out the path, and later you can use Finder to go there and pick up the database. Then you have the managed object context and your persistence container. Nothing big, it's all the boilerplate code. Then you have a prepare method. So the objects that you receive from the API, you need to convert it into ns managed object, then only you will be able to save it to the DB. So what this method does is, like, you get a array of album objects, which is the response model, and we are passing it to a convenience method which loops through every item and then makes a ns managed object item, and the context should be your current managed object context. And I'm using the map method to do this. So once it is done, like you have looped through all the album items, you just need to call save data, so which saves whatever is the changes in the current managed object. That means the data goes into your DB. That's all the core data manager does. Then I have another method which I'm not using really, but it's present there. It's just to save anything in the background using the perform background task option of the persistence container. Okay, now we have both network data manager and core data manager. Our base layer is ready. Now we need someone to make use of these two guys. So that is what I call it as DataStore. So DataStore is like your presenter or interactor in the Viper pattern and all. What it does is, it does the heavy operations, like view controller makes a call to the data store to give data. So that's exactly what this data store does. Let's look at what is there in data store. So in data store you have the network manager and CoreData Manager. Then I have a UI updater protocol. I will come to that later. Then you have something called fetch results controller. So fetch results controller is a very useful guy, especially to fetch data from core data and keep track of what is happening in core data. Let's say, for example, if any value gets changed, you will get an update. Using fetch results controller, and if you are using fetch results controller in combination with table view, it will be very easy for you to manage the data changes, etc., or to even to populate the table view also. So fetch results controller requires a fetch request. So we are using the entity name as album item, and fetch request needs a sort descriptor. So we are setting the title as the sort descriptor. Then you're creating the fetch results controller by passing in the fetch request and the managed object context and a section key name path. So what this does is you will get the data arranged according to each section, which would be easy for you to display a section table view. Then you have an init method where in which it accepts a network manager protocol. Right now I have defaulted it to the shared instance. Let's say if you want to inject something, you can inject a different network data manager. Then it takes a UI updater protocol method. Then you have the fetch album data, the main method which calls the network manager and fetches the information. Nothing big happening here. So like in the fetch data method we have already seen. So like you are sending back a result type. Let's say, like, if the call is successful, you will be sending the success associated as the associated value, and if it is error, it's going to be error. So it will be easy for you to capture it here in a switch case. Like if it is success, you are using the JSON decoder to decode the output, the array of album, and once you get the value, you are passing into the core data prepare method, which we have already seen, which loops through this response model and converts the response model into a NS managed object and then saves it to the DB. And once the saving is done, you are going to let the UI know that okay, it's updated. So I will come to this method a bit later. Right now I'm not doing anything with the errors, I'm just printing it out. Now there is another convenience method called get data from DB. So what this method does is it just asks the fetch results controller to fetch the data, like perform fetch. Let's say now let's go and see what is there in update UI. So this is update UI. UI updater protocol contains a method called update UI, which can be confirmed by any view controller which wants to update the UI. So right now if you go to the view controller, you can find that in the update UI you have two methods. This is just to get the data from DB and to reload the data. For example, when you start the app, you are going to fetch the album data and then you are going to save it. Once the save is successful, you will intimate the UI, okay, data is now saved, you can fetch it. So that's what happens here. Now let's go back to the data store. Now data store contains another few convenience method, which is to help the table view to load the data. It adopts to a protocol called DataStore protocol, which is nothing but rows count, item at index. So you have the section count here, rows count you will be getting from the fetch results controller sections, then item at. So here my intention was usually you you can easily get the NS managed object from the fetch results controller and then pass it on to the UI. But I felt like it's not a good idea to expose the NS managed objects into the UI classes, so I thought of converting the NS managed object into something called view model. So that is what is happening here. Again, here everything is string, so all these objects look the same. Like once you have more complex objects, like where it requires conversion, it would be easy to have a view model. So if you go and see the album view model, it's just the same. Like I'm not using all the values, I'm just going to display the title and the artist. So I just drill down some of the properties and once the album view model is created, it is being passed back to the UI so that UI can be displayed. All with the DataStore class. Now let's go and see what is there in the view controller. Before we jump into the view controller, I should say something about this Navigator. So Navigator is kind of a method which I found from Swift by Suntal. It's a great blog to read. It's like you are writing your navigation logic in a separate guy called the Navigator, who has all the information about which screen you should go next and all. So if you see the protocol, it has a destination and a navigate method, and we can see a sample navigator here, simple navigator. So here you can see I have defined a destination and I just call it as the second screen, and the second screen takes an input of album view model so that it can show the details in the second screen, and it has a navigation controller and an initialization method. Like you can initialize the navigator with a navigation controller, and you have the navigate method. So here you will be making the next view controller by passing the necessary input. Like here, for example, your second view controller takes album view model as the input, and this method will return a view controller. And once you get the view controller, you just push it to the navigation stack. Let's say, for example, if you have a third screen, so you can create another enum with case third, and then in here you can define which view controller it should navigate to, and this will be taken care. Instead of this code can be moved away from the view controller, and you can probably reuse it also. So that's about Navigator. I find this very useful. So here I'm creating a Navigator instance, Navigator variable, then an album view. Then in your view did load, I am setting up the Navigator and the table view. So here I tried a different approach in creating all the UI components programmatically. I have a different video to describe how you can do that. I'll post the link in the description, so you can. I'm not going to go through that. It's basic setting up the table view, delegate data source, and setting up the anchors, etc. Then you have the fetch data method, which is being called in the view did load, which in turn calls DataStore and the fetch album data and network manager and CoreData Manager, and then comes back to the update view to refresh the data. Then you have the NS fetch results controller delegate here. As I told earlier, these delegates will help you in tracking the changes in the table view, not in the table view, in the core data, and you can easily make the changes appear in the table view. So like content will change, that it tells that content is going to change, and based on if data is inserted, deleted or updated, you can do the necessary action. Like right now these are the default actions, and this is for the section. If any new section is inserted, deleted, etc. Right now I am not using it because there isn't any changes happening in the data right now. I just put the default values over here. Then you have the table view, data source and delegate. So here you can see, right, I am using the data stores convenience method to get the information rather than using an array in the view controller and getting the values. Then here you can see in item at index you are getting the album view model and using it, so that in future like something on the lower layer changes, this layer will stay intact. Then yeah, here you have the did select row at index, so I am using the navigator to navigate to my second view controller, passing the album. So here you can see, right, you are not using any view controller creation code or something like that here. So this way you can make your view controller bit clean. Yeah, and that's all with the view controller. So, and you have the custom cell which is nothing but again it has a title label and subtitle label, and here also I have created it programmatically. So I felt it bit easy, like you can just copy paste and reuse this wherever you want rather than creating an XAB or storyboards. Okay, so we talked a lot. So we have discussed the network layer, we have discussed the database layer, how it is being created, we have discussed how we create the data models, then we discussed how we created the data store and the UI. Now let's see it in action. I'm going to run the app. Yeah, see, you can see the data is popping up. I think I have run it earlier, that's why you are getting duplicate data, because every time you run it, it just calls and then update the DB. You can write your own logic to prevent that. Right now it just adds up, so you can see that based on the title it's being section, you can see different sections, and that's now the data is being fetched from the DB. So you first download the data as a JSON and save it in the DB and start reading it from the DB. So that's what is happening right now. And let's say if you close and run it again, you can see the data is getting added again. Yeah, and if you tap on one of the item here, it goes into the detail. You can see that the exact album view model is passed into the second view controller, and which shows the details. Yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say, and I will provide the link to this code in the description. Please go ahead and check it out. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.